At the time of posting, we're a few days away from Granblue Fantasy Fest, an annual fan event that developer CyGames holds for their mobile RPG Granblue Fantasy. If my assumptions are correct, we should also be getting a sizable info dump for their upcoming PS4 JRPG Granblue Fantasy Relink. If you've never heard of this game, you're not alone because there's really only been 7 minutes of actual gameplay shown, and it also hasn't been talked about all that much here in the West. But I feel like this is going to be the next must-play JRPG, and in today's video I want to tell you all about why I think that is. For context, let's talk about Granblue Fantasy, the mobile game, for a second. It's been a smash hit in Japan over the last few years, raking in hundreds of millions of dollars and even receiving an anime in 2017. For some reason, the game still has yet to officially release in the West, although there is an English patch available for the Japanese version. CyGames isn't a complete stranger to the West though, as they recently released the action mobile game Dragalia Lost in the United States in collaboration with Nintendo. Along with a few other hits in Japan, CyGames has been quietly stockpiling cash, and with a few console games already in development, I really believe they're going to be a force to be reckoned with on next generation systems. Heck, they've already been talking about making a new Zone of the Enders game, and if you haven't seen their Project Awakening trailer, you need to check it out after this video. It looks unreal. Granblue Fantasy Relink, likely due out in 2019, will be their first major foray into the console space and is being co-developed with renowned action game developer Platinum Games. Last year's Nier Automata was a pleasant surprise to many and really showed Platinum's aptitude for making RPGs. And that's my first big reason why I think Relink will be great. Sure, Platinum's track record has been spotty at times, but given the proper time and resources, they've proven they can turn out gold. And since this is probably the only time I'll get to mention this, I actually thought their Legend of Korra game was pretty good for what it was. Game controls are always a little difficult to explain if you've never played the specific game in question, but controls for Platinum games always feel so good. They're usually fairly simple, intuitive, and just make you as the player feel awesome. Platinum knows how to make exciting, flashy, fun combat, there's no denying that. From the scampits of gameplay we've seen so far, Relink looks like it's going to continue Platinum's strong combat pedigree. I also feel like Granblue Fantasy's world pairs really well with Platinum's style of combat and animation. There's a lot of bold color and cool spell effects happening at once that are simply a feast for the eyes. Overall, Relink just looks stunning so far, which leads me to my next point, the budget. We've seen a lot of B and C tier JRPGs this generation, from the usual suspects like Idea Factory, but we've also seen what a JRPG with a budget can look like thanks to Persona 5 and Dragon Quest XI. CyGames has deep pockets, and from the looks of things, Granblue Fantasy Relink looks like it has a sizable budget to compete with the big boys. Since Relink will kind of be CyGames' coming out party on consoles, I think they want to make a big splash with it, and it seems like they're poised to do just that. Now, a bigger budget doesn't always translate into a better game, but if you're trying to catch the attention of an audience that's never heard of you, having a visually stunning game goes a long way. Let's not kid ourselves though, the wider gaming audience, at least in the West, doesn't have a clue what Granblue Fantasy is, and that could be a potential hurdle. However, I think what's more likely to happen is that people will be drawn in by the visuals, positively associate Relink with Platinum's recent success, and the game will grow steadily thanks to a strong word of mouth. I don't think that's too outrageous of a prediction either, considering what happened last year with Nier Automata. I mean, if you told me that a Nier sequel would be a Game of the Year contender, I would have told you that you're out of your mind. But bring in a talented developer like Platinum, give them a decent budget, and look what happened. Now, I'm not saying Relink will be a Game of the Year contender, but I do think it will be a highly polished, quality game that will be received favorably. Speaking of positive association, let's bring up a name that carries a lot of weight in the JRPG community, Nobuo Uematsu. Uematsu is obviously most well known for his work on the Final Fantasy series, creating some of the most iconic soundtracks of all time. After he left Square, he mainly collaborated with Mistwalker on titles like The Last Story and Lost Odyssey, but since then he's kind of flown under the radar. However, he was one of the main composers on Granblue Fantasy soundtrack, and I honestly think it's his best work since Final Fantasy. If you don't believe me, go track down a playlist on YouTube and give it a listen for yourself. When considering a game's impact, the soundtrack is a bit more of a subtle aspect compared to story, gameplay, or visuals, but it can make a huge difference. Let's take a moment to examine 2 JRPG soundtracks from this year that impacted their games in 2 wildly different ways. Octopath Traveler released back in July on Switch and was pretty well received in all aspects. It's currently sitting at a respectable 83 on Metacritic and went on to sell over 1 million copies. One of Octopath's best features though is its soundtrack. It has a strong, memorable main theme, and if you've played the game, you can easily pair a character's theme song with that character. Every theme just matches each character's personality so well. The soundtrack was also nominated for Best Music at this year's Game Awards, and it was my pick to win. By having an excellent soundtrack, it elevates Octopath Traveler that much more and leaves an even more positive impression in the long run. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have Dragon Quest XI. By all accounts, Dragon Quest XI is a wonderful traditional RPG sitting at an even higher Metacritic score of 86. The production quality is on clear display, and it's arguably one of the best looking games the genre has to offer. But what really holds it back and tarnishes its impact is the soundtrack. First of all, it's a lot of the same tracks that have been used in the series for a while now. I understand that's part of Dragon Quest's charm, but seriously, it's time to move on and get some new themes. Most people's main complaint though is the production quality. The music just sounds like a bunch of MIDI files. What's most baffling though is that Dragon Quest VIII, a game that came out 13 years and 2 console generations ago, had its entire soundtrack performed by a real symphony. Why would you not just do that again? It feels lazy and makes Dragon Quest XI feel dated when it's clearly not. This poor effort is a black mark on an otherwise fantastic game. The point I'm trying to illustrate here is that a game's soundtrack matters and impacts how people remember the game overall. Thankfully, Granblue Fantasy Relink looks like it's going to have a highly produced symphonic soundtrack. And I really believe Uematsu's name still means something when he's attached to a project, so I think him doing the music will bring a lot of goodwill. The next point I want to talk about is Granblue Fantasy's world. Having a cool world to get lost in really matters in RPGs. Whenever you think of a certain game, you can't help but think of that game's world. When you think of Final Fantasy VII, you likely think of the dingy, dark Midgar, or for Chrono Cross, you probably think of its bright colors and overall island aesthetic. Granblue Fantasy has a gorgeous world, but what it also has going for it is one of the most underutilized settings in gaming, the sky. Granblue Fantasy does have quite a bit of ground locations, but it also has plenty of stunning islands floating in the sky. If you pay close attention to the footage shown so far for Relink, you can catch glimpses of the floating islands as well as plenty of clear shots of airships. My imagination is already going wild with how cool this world will be to explore. One JRPG series that gets praised for a similar setting and is way past due for a sequel is Skies of Arcadia. Fans have been begging Sega for an entry for years now and haven't even got as much as an HD remaster. While this obviously isn't a sequel to Skies of Arcadia, I think Granblue Fantasy Relink's floating island setting will definitely satiate those same fans. This may sound kinda silly, but I think one big thing Relink has going for it is its newness. Let's think about this for a second. The only new JRPG series of AAA quality to release in the last 5 or so years were Xenoblade Chronicles in 2012 and Ni no Kuni back in 2013. There have certainly been new JRPG series that were big successes like Bravely Default and Octopath Traveler, but nothing to really rival the production value of the big dogs. The JRPG genre is a relatively old one and most of the popular series have been on top for a long time now. Persona 5 and Nier Automata really shook things up last year and it feels like the beginning of a new era. If Platinum and CyGames can deliver, I think Granblue Fantasy Relink can be a huge part of this wave of new exciting JRPGs. Something cool that Relink is going to have that very few other JRPGs do is a multiplayer component. Other series have had multiplayer with mixed success. Whether it's the ability for a second player to join in battles like in the Tales series, or a full-blown separate mode like Final Fantasy XV's Comrades. It's unclear if Relink's multiplayer will be for the entire game's duration or in a separate mode. The only thing we do know for certain is that it will be for up to 4 players. If I had to wager a guess though, I'd say it's a separate mode that has dungeons with bosses waiting at the end of each. Whatever it ends up being though, we'll likely know soon enough. One last thing to consider in regards to Relink being the next big JRPG is the community. Let's be real, we're all a passionate bunch. We were so woefully underserved last generation that whenever we saw a glimmer of quality, we latched on for dear life. It still kinda puzzles me to this day that Square Enix couldn't see the sales success of Bravely Default coming. We wanted those games and no one was giving them to us. Then when we finally got quality titles this generation, we showed our passion and made our voices heard. On both sides of the coin. The year before Persona 5 came out, I went to Fanime as Joker and I was only one of 3 Persona 5 cosplayers. The year after, there were so many that I couldn't even count them all. People loved this game so much that they were making costumes out of the f***ing menus! On the flip side, fans were so dissatisfied with Ys 8's localization that NIS America went on to completely rewrite and re-record the entire script. That's unheard of. What I'm getting at is that if Granblue Fantasy Relink is any good, you better believe the community will make their voices heard and sing its praises from the mountaintops. At the end of the day, I'm just really excited about this game. I love JRPGs, and we don't often get big new franchises like this, especially from teams with proven track records like Platinum and CyGames. One of my goals with this channel is to introduce as many people as possible to JRPGs and show them some cool games that they may not have heard of before. I subscribe to a lot of gaming channels on YouTube and no one is talking about this game, so I just felt like I needed to make a big blowout video and get everyone excited. So what do you guys all think? Is this the first you're hearing about Relink? Are you excited? Did a new trailer come out already and this is all old news? Let me know in the comments. Thanks as always for watching everyone, and we'll see you next time.